I'm Matthew Molyneux, for those who don't know who I am. Thanks again for coming to what is now the 5th Occupation Matters seminar.
And we had to go without food to come.
Yes, some of us have just missed a very important occasion because today is the opening of the new Griffith Health Centre, and we have just left that and have missed food and tours. So I apologise to those people who are hungry or wanted a tour of the building, but we can sort both of those things out at a later date maybe. We've got the technology working. There's about 6 or 7 sites have logged in, so that's fantastic. So we'll move quickly on, and I'll introduce Rayya Ghul, who's an occupational therapist and senior lecturer at Canterbury Christ Church University in the UK. It's very fortuitous that Rayya is here. Her daughter is doing an exchange at Griffith at South Bank, and we've been connected on Twitter, I think, mainly. And when I found out, I invited Rayya, and she has very willingly given up some of her time, which is technically holiday, to come and do this presentation. I'll hand over to Rayya if she wants to introduce herself anymore, but otherwise to get started. But just to let people know, there's a bit of juggling between the AV because we're going to switch between the camera, the PowerPoint, and a website at some point as well. So just patience with it while we do that. So I'll hand over to Rayya then. Thank you.
So welcome everybody and the people who are joining us. This is my very first video conferencing event ever, so that's quite exciting. Just to let you know that I flew in from England yesterday, so and this I think is probably about the time at which, if you're going to get jet lagged, it really kicks in. So I'm quite renowned amongst my students for having little lapses where I stop talking, usually because I forget what I'm saying, so that might happen even more today. But I'm really delighted to be here, and thank you very much to Matthew for inviting me. As Matthew said, I teach on an occupational therapy degree programme in the UK. I've been doing that for 12 years. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is a tool that we developed as part of what we teach our undergraduate students to help them understand the barriers and enablers to participation. I think we might as well move to that. So I'm right now that I can't be seen.
You can't be seen.
I can pick my nose now. Context of participation is the name of the module that we run, and it's also the name of the tool that I'm going to introduce you to. So, oops, and I didn't want to go that far. So just to give you a little bit of background, what we are doing on the programme is very similar to Matthew. In fact, it was just to say briefly that 10 years ago I was completing my master's programme, and Matthew came and talked to us about occupational science, and I was really inspired. In fact, all of us on the programme were very inspired by the idea, welcome, of making our course much more occupation focused, something that we are very committed to at Canterbury Christ Church. We had a bit of a dilemma as where do we put this part of the course? We have as all courses, we have requirements to teach certain things. And so we had requirements, I'm going to put my glasses on, to teach elements of psychology and sociology to our students as background, as underpinning knowledge for occupational therapists. And we also very much wanted to bring occupational science into the programme, and in particular issues around occupational justice. This fitted in for us with the idea that we are thinking about a social model, working from a social model rather than individual model, and at the same time, the World Health Organization had produced the new classification, the International Classification of Function, which brought together the idea that it wasn't simply something that was going on in your body that might cause problems for you, but it was a combination of the person's body function and body structures and functions. They use the term activities and participation and the environment, and all of this working together to create barriers and enablers to participation that seemed to fit very well with the ideas that we were trying to bring together. At the same time, the World Health Organization's research produced the social determinants of health, which we also felt that we had to teach our students, And finally, we wanted also to make our students very much aware of the link between occupation and health and well-being. So we had all of these things that we had to try and put together. So myself and my colleague were sitting trying to organise a 16-hour course module to teach all of these things, and we just thought, how are we going to do that? How on earth are we going to do this? So we started looking in the literature, and I was reading Anne Wilcox at the time, and I came across these diagrams which were like two triangles, which were to do with the factors which either enabled or were barriers to health and well-being. And I started working from there. So what we did, I like diagrams, so I created a version for ourselves. Now this is the tool. I'm going to show you how it works in a minute. Now, for those of you who are not in the room, who are video conferencing, can you see this with the actual words? Can they speak to me?
Yes, I
can.
It's a little bit fuzzy.
It's a bit fuzzy. I am going to talk through it. I'm going to tell you about it. So bear with me. So instead of triangles, what we decided to do was to make circles. So this is kind of like the entire course put into one tool. So at the centre, originally we actually had health and well-being. And then the green circle around the edge is identity in the body, which denotes the person. We chose, again, originally we were looking at terms like psychology and biology to denote the person. However, both that and the health and well-being in the centre became quite problematic for us because it meant that the students were limited to only certain ways of talking about the person. So the green circle is the person. As I said, we chose identity in the body as ways to think about how we can talk about both the physical aspects of the person and the non-material.
You can't do anything about the clicker on the front.
Okay. So that's what those two words are. The next layer, which is the kind of indigo colour, those are the local factors which can act as barriers and enablers to participation. So we have support networks. Well, that's kind of, we're used to that idea, the support networks. We can think about those not simply as people's family and friends, but also for quite a lot of people, their support networks might only be the professionals that they see. We have local environments, so again, stuff that we're very familiar with. Might be the house, the street you live in, the local shops, the local transport, and so on. And then we've got daily living activities. And daily living activities we've put in the local environment because when we started thinking about it, it kind of seemed to us that we were thinking about, well, those are things that you choose to do. So why are they in the environment? And then we started thinking about it, well, actually, generally speaking, what we choose to do is in the environment. It's brought out of us from the environment. When I got up this morning, the clothes that I chose to wear, my choices that I made, they were made because I was coming here to talk to you, and also because Matthew had said we're going to this opening ceremony where all these dignitaries are going to be, so I thought I better look reasonably smart. I never wear high heels. And then I was thinking about, well, we were thinking about that if we were going to teach students about the barriers and enablers to participation, we had to start thinking about the fact that these people could be anywhere in the world. And for example, if the place you live in the world is somewhere where your water source is a 4-hour walk away, well, your daily living activities are going to involve 8 hours of walking there and back, however much you might want to be sitting at home sewing or doing something else or whatever. So it started to make sense to us that it would be helpful for the students to really start to engage with that idea that daily living activities are actually something which the environment takes out of us, that pulls out of us. So then we started drawing on the social determinants of health, which is the orange circle, which are the social factors which create barriers and enablers to participation. So in there we have the media, and we can talk there about media representation of the populations that we work with. Particularly, we talk quite a lot about people with mental health problems because they seem to suffer an awful lot of stigma, so we can draw on that. Education, housing, huge amount of research that's available about the effects of housing on health and well-being. Economic status, that's something which gives you a position in society, affords you various opportunities. Health and social care, obviously. Technology, leisure and work. So all of these are the social factors which we can look at in terms of a barrier enabler to participation. And then in the outer ring, we are the national factors. So those are the type of economy. I was talking to Matthew earlier about the fact that we have quite a lot of students who come on our courses who have never really thought about what a type of economy it is because they've grown up within a capitalist system, which just seems completely normal. They don't really, it's like fish breathing water, fish swimming in water. They're not really aware of that they are in a type of economy. National policies, all the legislation, and the sociocultural values. And these give us opportunities to think through the different aspects. I'm going to just give you a sense of how with the students we think a little bit more deeply about them. So one of the things that's called the critical thinking tool, and the reason it's called the critical thinking tool is we wanted our students to start actually thinking about the fact that life for a person with, say, some form of impairment, like they're maybe using a wheelchair because they're unable to walk. When our students come in, they're very much thinking about the fact that it's not having mobility that makes you disabled. So what we want them to start thinking about is that's an assumption which we'd like to challenge, so that we start to get them thinking about what are the actual barriers, what are the things that make life difficult for the people that they're going to be working with, their future consumers. Developing importance of context, developing understanding of the importance of context is part of the whole critical thinking process. So obviously, the kind of presenting the contextual factors all together give the students that opportunity to think about it and to start thinking about different possibilities. So they might start to work in groups discussing what their theories are about why somebody or why certain populations, what their barriers and enablers to participation might be. And they start to be some of the students do begin to actually be quite reflective here. We have students who start to talk about never having thought about it this way, of suddenly realising why people might be having difficulties beyond what they'd originally thought. So I think this is I've already talked about this, but one of the things that I think we have realised as we've been developing these ideas is that actually the international factors, global factors, have now also increasingly impacted on participation. They also filter through. Okay, so as I said, we use it to explore the barriers and enablers. And the way that we do that is, with the tool, what we do is we get the students to analyse stories. So we show the students narratives, either through kind of patient voices films. I'm assuming that you have a similar sort of thing here in Australia, where people are just talking heads, things that you can access. But we also bring service users into the classroom. We have like a mini conference where we have a panel. People come in, they tell their story, the students can talk to them. But also, they're going out on clinical practice and clinical placement, and they get an opportunity to talk to people and listen to their stories, and they can use the tool to think about what are the barriers and enablers for this person. The other thing that we can do is that we can start to give them a kind of historical and perspective on it. So we can start to, we teach them about health practices from the past. So we might show them videos from the last century of, in the UK, children were born with limb deficiencies due to their mothers taking thalidomide, for example. And in the UK, they were all taken at before the age of 1, put into institutions and brought up in these institutions. They were given numbers. They were experimented on. They had prosthetic limbs and arms that they were forced to wear. They sometimes even had some of their vestigial limbs cut off in order to put their prosthetics on. Your faces are saying it all. This is what our students... These were well documented. They were made films of in the 1960s, and they were actually projected through the television to the people saying, you know, look what marvelous things we're doing. Modern medicine is helping these poor people. And when we show these films, the students, rightly, are deeply shocked. And we can talk to them about, well, you know, who were these people? Who were these doctors? Were they sort of evil, nasty? You know, because when you start talking about giving people numbers, it's inevitable that people start making links to some of the really hideous practices in our history as humans. And we can start to say, what is the way that we talk about people that allows that to happen? So what we then start to do is we actually start to teach them a little bit about discourses. So the idea that the way that we talk about people then has an effect on the practices that we carry out and the types of institutions that we have. That way they start to think about, well, what am I doing? You know, so we kind of ask them, what do you think? How do you stop yourself? How do you have to start thinking in order to go out and practice in an ethical way? To be able to resist perhaps some of the ideas that come at you, to be able to think those through and to think, you know, is my practice ethical? So these are first year undergraduates, by the way. We're teaching them essentially discourse analysis. So we're teaching them, but we do it in a way which we hope is a little bit more accessible. So we do that. We can do that with all sorts of parts of these social structures. We get them to look at national policies. At the moment in the UK, I don't know if you're aware of this, we've had a new government for the past 2 or 3 years, and they're using very different language to the previous government. Previously, so we can show the students how the way that disabled people were talked about in the kind of up to the sort of 70s, 80s. In Britain, we had very much talking about things about care, charity, looking after. It was very much that medical model stuff. And then we had the kind of rights talk, so we had rights, independence, independent living, rights not charity, those sorts of things. And what we then got was access and so on. The new government that's come in has changed the way that they talk about disabled people. And if you listen very carefully at what they're talking about, they use the term fairness all the time. This is a new discourse that they're using. So for us, it's a bit of a gift because we can show the students. Now, what's quite interesting is that this idea of fairness is also linked to what's currently happening in the UK, which is the demolition of the welfare state. At least that's my opinion of it. But it certainly is, it's all about telling people that, you know, there's a whole lot of things that are going on about people being described. The media is joining in to describe people who claim benefits. They're using words like scroungers and strivers. So these are the sorts of things that we can kind of talk to about the students. With the students. We can also talk, there was a big scandal recently in the UK in the last 10 years that people with learning disabilities in hospitals are ending up starving to death. And again, this is only in the last 10 years. So we can talk to the students, we can interrogate this and say what happens when these things take place, what needs to be in place for, sorry, just closing the door. What needs to be taking place in order for those sort of practices to take place in the 21st century. So that's an opportunity. The other opportunity we have is that we can critique OT theories. We can actually ask the students to look at OT theories. In the UK, we teach a variety of different theories. So we teach MOHO, the model of human occupation, Canadian model of occupational performance, and so on. And we can look at them and say, what do these theories say about participation? How are they different? So it's a way that students can also engage with them. And we can ask questions. So we can ask questions about the participation of individuals, groups, or communities. So I think now would be a good time to show the interactive tool. So, interesting, this isn't so wobbly. Maybe it's because it's coming through. So this is, what you saw before looks a bit like a diagram, but it is in fact a tool. So if I move over here a little bit. So what is important is that each of these aspects actually turns, which allows you to think through how the different factors interact with each other. So you might think about what promotes participation for disabled people in work. So we might ask a question like that: how is participation in work promoted? And we can work all the way out from the person through the local environment. So they may well, living in an accessible home, have access to public transport or a mobility car, for example. And they can also get into their workplace because their workplace is accessible. That then might be enabled because of national policies that are in place. So then we can say what happens if you have different policies. How will that change things? You might be able to talk about how being in work gives someone a particular economic status. That might mean that they can then support their family, and that will give them different relationships, which will change their identity. And being able to move be enabled through accessible environments can actually change people's experience of their body. So we can talk about this very rich way that participation and the various different factors can actually interact with the person and create real changes. So can I just get some feedback if you've got any questions at this stage? Things that you might need me to explain or to think about. What are you thinking about?
How much detail do you put into each single one of those
That's
points?
a great question.
Because they're so big in themselves without then adding someone that has any type of problem in it.
Yeah, that's a great question. We deliberately left these as open as possible because it allows then for sort of local differences to take place. what we wanted was for them to, what we want is for it to be something which is interpretive. We put the students in groups. They tend to discuss in groups. So they might hear a story and they'll talk about it. They'll theorize. Well, I think it's because of this. I think it's because of that. So you can put as much or as little as you want. So we start off with the students' own knowledge, because they all bring their own knowledge of how they participate in the world. And then we add little bits. So just down here, there's a glossary. So if I click on that, when you now hover over one element, you get a basic level of information about it. We have materials which give you much bigger ones. They give you questions you can ask, and then they'll link to, for example, the social determinants of health will expand on that enormously. But we can, but because it's open, we can also use these historical perspectives. My colleague Ian, for example, gives a lecture which is about how people with mental health problems have been viewed throughout history, and starts kind of with the ancient Greeks. And we talk, and we do the same thing with people with physical impairments. So when we're talking about the different practices, like babies being left out on hillsides to die, or and so on. And what the students start to realise is that the way that we view disabled people, people with mental health problems, people with learning difficult disabilities, and so on, now is still tinged, and the practices are still reflective of practices from the past. They didn't come from nowhere, because what we want them to think about is that things have not always been this way, and they don't need necessarily to be that way in the future. So this is where the critical aspect comes in. It allows them to think differently about things. For example, we show different ideas of mental and emotional distress. So we have the psychiatric view, but we also present the hearing voices view. And we also present intercultural views, and that's what we're really aiming to create different possibilities and openness about knowledge, rather than saying this is the way it is. So that students right from year one can actually develop a criticality about what they're thinking about. Are there any other questions?
I think the first three circles, or the inner three circles, are really the way, I suppose, I conduct my practice.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the things that I think about.
Yeah.
Start with the person, then decide what's going on with their local environment, social environment, etc. And then, sort of problem solving around that. But yes, just a number of things having to influence the outcome.
So when you're working from local policies, aren't you? So are you saying that bit is a bit invisible at the moment to you, or you don't?
We depend upon the local policies. We assume that they're there.
Yeah.
We'd be really stuffed if they weren't.
Yeah.
Because if we don't have funding for equipment, for instance, then we can't do our job.
Yeah.
But, so we just hope that they stay, I suppose. Cross our fingers at each election.
I mean, for us in Britain now, it's very, very interesting, because when we teach this, I talk about values, sociocultural values, and I'll say, what are British values? And 15 years ago, I could have guaranteed what the answer was. Now, it's just so completely different, because our entire society has changed so much now. We are a multicultural society in Britain now. There isn't one British identity. That gives us an opportunity to really think things through with our students, because those things cascade through very strongly to the local environment support networks and so on. Have I got any? Can I take questions from outside the room? I mean, if there's anyone who's watching who wants to ask a question. How do I?
Look, maybe not a a question, but probably a comment from having recently just had a student, and being able to appreciate that by having the moving concentric circles, it enables you to break down what can be sometimes a very convoluted and complex issue for a person, and break it down by shifting the circles around, and to see each issue in a more serial or linear manner, and see them for what they are clearly, rather than being overwhelmed by too much factors and too much information. So I think it's quite a powerful tool to help with that more critical thinking and making it clearer.
Thank you. Yeah, and that's very much what we hoped. And when we designed it that way, I was saying to Matthew, originally it was just a diagram, because we were just thinking, how can we put all of this into a module? And we decided, what happened before was we used to teach a psychology and sociology module, plus some elements of occupational science and disability studies. It was a 23-week module that had distinct elements, or sort of distinct lectures. And then the assignment at the end required the students to put it all together and say, how is it relevant to occupational therapy? And they couldn't do it, except for the very kind of the most able students. And that was our, as educators, that was our puzzle. We wanted to, for students to be able to get all of that, but they were learning it bit by bit, and then we somehow expected them magically to put it together at the end. So that was a decision made, was to put it all up front, so that the students had it all at once. But then we kind of had this problem about then, when it was static, that they might think that national policies only related to the media, for example, that the elements just related to the next one. And so there was this moment when we were both staring at a computer screen and put our fingers on it and went, wouldn't it be great if it moved? And initially, in fact, on this presentation, which I believe you'll all receive, there are links at the end to the page where you can download. This is an app that you can download onto a Windows phone, an Android phone, or an Apple phone. But there is also a link to the original cardboard cutout. If you want to have something that you just have, in your pocket, you can download that, print it out, cut it out, and use that. So you can turn it around with your hands. I failed in bringing mine along today, but that's for sure. And I think that's exactly what happens. It's both an aid memoir, so it helps you. You don't have to carry all of those things in your head, but at the same time, it helps you think through and make those connections. Do you think that was something that you might use with your students?
Yeah, look, definitely, because I think sometimes when they go through university, I remember in UQ the first year, they talk about this top-down approach and bottom-up approach, trying to take that analogy through from looking at performance components right through to massive environmental issues. It can be quite overwhelming, and it's not until the final years that they start to grasp it because they've experienced it. I think the great thing about this model is, even now, if you to line things up, if there's an issue, like for instance what's happened with the changes in the disability support pension here in Australia, and changes in New Start allowance and what single mothers now get, that's had an impact then on what they can access in terms of, say, education or housing, which are critical factors for them being able to provide some form of security for the children as they're bringing it up. So you can really see how national policies then flow through down to the next, and I think it becomes quite a dynamic and powerful tool to illustrate top-down and bottom-up influences on a person's participation.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah, that's again, I think, as some of the things that have come out, is because you can also start to talk about future consequences. You can start to hypothesize about, well, what might happen in future. If someone's economic status is reduced and their opportunities for education are thereby reduced, so you can start to think through all of those things. I mean, we'd love policymakers to be using this tool. Think through the choices that they're making. That's assuming that their intentions are the same as ours. Okay, I'm going to move on, if that's all right. So, just to kind of, this is to kind of further the thinking. I've put up a big word here, an occupational ontology of the person. This is just to say what are the things that we've discovered from listening to the conversations of the students we developed this originally in 2003, and listening to the conversations of the students and also reading their essays. The essay that the final assignment that they have to do for this course is we give them stories from the media. We give them 5 different stories. Each of them relate to a different type of essentially type of future consumer, but they're generally either media celebrities or people whose story has been in the media. For example, a 1-hour documentary about a man with Tourette's syndrome, a long article about Frank Gardner, who was a foreign correspondent for the BBC, who was shot in Saudi Arabia and became a wheelchair, had a spinal injury and became a wheelchair user as a result. And so on. And the students then use the tool to analyse those stories. They have to think specifically about the barriers and enablers to participation, the actual or potential effects on health and well-being. And then they also have to do a reflective piece about the whole module, about how that has challenged their assumptions, changed their thinking. And what we've kind of noticed is that they are talking about people in this very different way. So their ontology, their theory of what a person is really very interesting, because they start talking about the person in this interactional, dynamic creation and recreation of the person way. And they start to see the link between doing, being, and becoming, which, as I'm sure you're familiar with, all of you, is from Anne Wilcox. So they start to talk about the human being as this kind of really fluid and flexible being. And I think this is very exciting. First-year students really getting that the way that we see people as occupational therapists are as having this, always having this amazing potential to change. And this is something that we felt gave us a bit of an edge over perhaps some of the other disciplines who talk about the person. So we felt that it helped us to move into, and I'm going to go back to that slide quickly. What we felt was that actually, as occupational therapists, what we're talking about is a way of speaking about a person which is this idea of the occupational being, the human being as an occupational being. We started to feel that we were almost beginning to generate knowledge and evidence around that. As OTs, what we were so concerned with on our program was to get the students to have faith in occupation as a source of health and well-being. I came from a mental health background. I worked for 25 years in mental health services before I became an educator. And an awful lot of the people I was working with were using non-occupational focused interventions, and they just weren't doing OT at all anymore. They weren't doing anything that involved anything that could be described as a daily living activity. They were doing psychological interventions and psychotherapeutic interventions. And that was pretty much it. And I felt those people were being deprived of an OT. I'm a bit old-fashioned. I trained in the 1970s. And, you know, it was all tasks, skills, and roles in those days, but it was actually about doing. So I got very excited about the idea that what we were doing was actually reinforcing the person as constantly being shaped by and shaping the world through participation. I think that's a very exciting idea. And so I put down a little bit of a challenge, really, to the idea that psychology can tell us everything about the person. So that's my challenge. I think as occupational therapists, we have something really, really special to say. And I think there are lots of other places in the world and in human knowledge where we can join and talk about the person in this way as an interactional being. And the other thing that I thought was, that for me, that I've been working on, I've been really thinking about, is this idea that occupational therapy is a transformative practice. and really owning that as an idea and celebrating it, because I think that's pretty exciting personally. So this idea that participating in occupations is a constant process of creation and recreation. And this is what I would say to I would say to the students. You know, if you don't believe that doing changes you, that we're changing every moment, then you actually can't be an OT, because that's what we're doing. We're engaging in this extraordinary process where I think it's almost magical because of the inherent, ever-changing, constantly changing nature of the person. And the fact that everything that we do, because we're conscious, and because of the way that our brains are formed, is constantly changing us, then we have it's an enormous power. And we are the only profession that has all of these, the three elements of the person, the environment, the occupation to work with.
Well, I think the really important thing is to really push that at students so that they feel really confident when they go out and practice.
Exactly.
Because I think the worst thing, and I think it's tragic when you say that they're all out there doing psychological intervention, therapy.
I wouldn't say all, but...
No, I know, but a lot of people do. They just sort of fit into a team and then end up doing stuff that's not OT. And OT has so much to offer. I think it's tragic when that happens.
I absolutely agree with you. I mean, that's what my passion is. That's why I went into education. That's why we run what we're doing the way we do, is we want those students right from year one to be passionate about occupation and see participation in occupations as a powerhouse of change. And the critical bit is so that when they go out into practice, they've got a way of engaging with the bottom-up approach, people who are doing it in different ways. That is critical but kind. It's not sort of, oh, they're not doing what we're doing. But to be able to engage with it and think, well, they've come from a different paradigm, they've maybe been taught at a different time. We've been teaching this for 10 years now. We're hoping that our graduates are slowly changing. And there are other parts of obviously, of the OT education. See, Matthew's doing pretty much the same sort of stuff.
Matthew hasn't started yet. We've just got to wait and see on that.
He's been doing stuff for a while. So this idea of occupational therapy as a practice. There's a typo there. I'll have to sort that out. Oh no, that isn't a typo. So occupational therapy as a practice creates locally negotiated solutions woven from a complex interaction between the person, environment, occupation nexus. So this idea of locally created solutions, locally negotiated solutions, kind of fits into the sort of what we might call a social constructionist idea, rather than this idea that everything is fixed, linear, cause and effect. We know that our practice isn't like that, but quite often we're asked to research or talk about it in that way, and we know the difficulties we have doing that. So I would like us to actually have some kind of language and some kind of philosophical underpinning that we can join with to be able to talk about that with more confidence. I don't know, people might not agree that's a good thing to do, but that's what I'm interested in. And this gets the last. So, and also the idea that any change that happens that's expressed through a person is not actually an individual change, because you can't hold on to the person as a fixed, separate identity. So whatever happens to the person that's going to ripple is going to affect their support networks, their local environment, the way that they carry out daily living activities, and so on. And you can even think about, you can think about that on a small scale. I don't know if it's the same here, but when we have a lot of occupational therapy students come on the course who are not married by the end of it. It's very dangerous coming on an OT course. But you change, things change, it changes your environment. But also you can shape your environment, and you only need to think about the independent living movement in America, started by veterans coming back from Vietnam saying, what, I have to live in a home for the rest of my life? On your bike? Not doing that. And then they got together, actively created support networks, their daily living activities involved activism, they changed all the way up to national policies and created a very different life for many, many disabled people. So I think that's exciting, and it's an exciting way of thinking about occupation and participation in occupations. I don't know what you think. So that's all I've got to show you. I've got some references, but they can go up later.